Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. We will be presenting the synthesis map for citizen voice and decision-making, exploring the power of dialogue in Toronto's public spaces. The map will be shared at the end of the presentation. The team consists of Ashwini, Gawli, Kendra, Matheson, Perera, Nafeha Khan, Rimaz, Mohamed, Tanya, Thomas, Fernandes, and myself, Manal Dimachk. Unfortunately, due to personal reasons, Ashwini and Nafeha could not attend our presentation. So this synthesis map and service design brief were developed in the Understanding System course during the winter term this year. Our work is based only on secondary research and reflects our learning throughout the course. So on March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the spread of COVID-19 a global pandemic, and many countries declared city lockdown and no one can leave their houses. So the streets were empty, lonely, and gloomy. It transformed Toronto into a ghost city. People had been asked to stay at home as much as possible to contain the spread of the pandemic. Many people were deprived of freely visiting green spaces. To ensure social distancing, some cities decided to temporarily or partially close urban parks, playgrounds, and sports grounds for the public, leading to an increased pressure on other open spaces such as squares and streets. This situation highlighted the unequal distribution of and access to urban parks and gardens in cities. So the recreational use of public green spaces and natural areas rose due to reduced mobility within the city alongside travel restrictions. So people were also encouraged to spend time outdoors to ensure sound mental and physical health in general. Many urban green spaces were thus functioning as important places for diverse activities in people's daily lives, places for mental recovery and physical activity, and later increasingly as places where social gatherings were allowed or at least tolerated. So briefly, the pandemic had pushed dozens of communities to develop temporary expansions of public and green space by closing streets, launching pop-up parks, and hosting socially distanced outdoor events. The COVID-19 crisis fundamentally changed our relationship with public spaces. We felt distinct of having lost our familiar, vibrant, social, and lively public places. So the parks and green spaces can provide economic, health, social, and environmental benefits to individuals and communities, but without investment in or use of them, these benefits go unrealized. So people's use of public space during the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the urgent need for places that can adapt to a variety of needs, where people can experience nature, exercise, and interact with each other. When we came together as a group in Peter's class, we were interested in exploring the system of city streets, having come from many cities around the world, while also having visited many inspirational cities. Toronto and its emergence from the pandemic presented us with a unique opportunity to further investigate its social system of city streets as it embodies classic, historical elements as well as modern features that we see in so many metropolitan cities. We started with an overly broad perspective of city streets and narrowed it down to the social system of city streets. This then led us to explore the effects of citizen dialogue, which we believe informs the success of public spaces along with thoughtfully planned infrastructure. We would like to take you on the journey of this exploration with us through our synthesis map. We will start by framing the boundaries of our exploration and understanding the stakeholders and power dynamics involved. We then use the three horizons tool to map out the system intervention over time. And finally, we present the intervention strategies that we propose to make our changes a reality and highlight some proposals from the service design brief. I will now hand it over to Tanya.
Thank you, Manal. So our problem framing brought us to the question of how can citizen dialogue influence the social future of the city, streets, and public space. And as many of us have experienced, Toronto enjoys a rich history of public space with distinct voices influencing how public space is used as well as the spaces themselves influencing the fabric of the city. We used a timeline to highlight some of the key milestones in this history, from the Nathan Phillips Square, built in 1965 and labeled as an urban plaza, to the Jane Jacobs movement, a free citizen-led walking in conversation in 1971, to the Bobby Rosenfield Park, and to the Don River Valley, a centerpiece of Toronto's rapidly growing downtown, to the legislation of graffiti. And as we know, graffiti and street can become a controversial, but it can also be a medium for voices in social change and protests or expressions of community desire. And finally, the Yonge and Dundas Square, one of the most programmed public spaces in the city. So thus today, Toronto's public space makes up a complex system reflecting the city's culture, the politics, the classes, and influences health, social well-being, and vibrancy. So we began with an overview of the problem space where we identified a social structural problem as well as power dynamics involved in the stakeholder dialogue. And as we began to frame our system inquiry, we explored the purpose, the functions, the structures, and the processes of public spaces through the lens of a social system. The iterative inquiry analyzed power structures embedded in the relationships and processes of street design and function, and uncovered a social structural problem at the root of this system. So exploring streets and public spaces as functions of utilities, it kind of showed tensions between stakeholders at various levels of the power structure who use public spaces for their own purpose. And we frame the scope and boundaries of the current system of city streets by looking at the actors involved in the current system and drawing a frame of inquiry. So with the iterative inquiry, we iterated various inquiries, be it city streets for movements or streets for utility. And this iterative inquiry considers the street as a public passageway, facilitating the flow of people moving across the city. And we see how common mobility needs are a part of a much larger complex system of processes. Existing streets and public spaces also confine further land development and urban growth, defining how and where the city continues to be formed. And in this way, the public space has a bidirectional effect on the urban landscape, being both formed by the city processes and forming the landscape themselves. Thus, there are multiple stakeholders who use the public spaces for their own purposes, such as the infrastructure of the city connecting residences and businesses with power and water, and as a medium of public expression and public surveillance. In this way, the public space is used as a tool for both personal and common use, as well as for government use to monitor, regulate, and enforce authority. Use of street is controlled by the government, and government agencies are gatekeepers to the streets to meet their functional goals. Consequently, public spaces that are primarily built for function and for efficiency have become the sites of social structural problems. And a shift towards reclaiming public space from neoliberalism and neoliberal policies favor urban utilization that maximizes tax revenues. And as we look at the factors that are influenced by neoliberal practices, it becomes apparent that urban space is becoming the playground for implementing various technological solutions, influencing activities like the increased use of the Internet of Things and regulation of movement. And then moving on to our systemagram, we use the systemagram to dig deeper into the relationships in the system of public spaces and describe the power structures we identified earlier. Each node here represents a key influence of the public spaces of Toronto. This included individuals, street infrastructure, economy and job markets, commercial establishments, government institutions, services, and community and culture. We see that a social system within the streets of Toronto are complex. Relationships between key influences are multifaceted, and individual users are only one of the several powerful stakeholders. However, we also see that the individuals are the most impacted group by the actions of other influencers. So this gives individuals the unique position to argue for an equitable solution for multiple uses that meets the needs of the local context. Over to Rimaz now, who will take you through the three horizons to map out the system interventions over time.
Thank you, Tanya. So for the next step in the design journeys process was to further refine our understanding of the system. While the systemogram set up the base, we explored and built upon this understanding through mapping system archetypes and influence mapping. Once we felt that we had a solid understanding of the system, we naturally started thinking of and asking questions about our vision for the future system, which then led us into envisioning desired future stage of the design journeys process, where we started developing our three horizons. Here, we perceive the three horizons as three individuals, rather defined by their characteristics, and tried digging deeper by exploring a causal layout analysis at the intersections of the horizons. In our first horizon, we have the realist, the practical individual who is very much concerned about current issues and is desperate for change, but just not anything immediate or radical. Certain aspects of this realist that we see fit for our desired visions have to do with regulatory practices and buffers. To summarize it, the realist is very dependent on external forces to help begin the process of change. Jumping ahead all the way into the future, in the third horizon, we have the dreamer who is in a place to dream and turn them into realities. And that place where the dreamer is would potentially be the end goal of our interventions. We have freedom in expression, rooted ties with the communities, bioregional interventions, citizen participation, cleaner technologies, balanced power structures. And like personally, we intentionally took an aspirational approach in crafting the third horizon. And looking at the shift from the first horizon to the second horizon, we acknowledge that there will need to be a transition in the mental models, worldviews, and the structures that support the system. Here, we see an individualistic worldview where convenience is triumphing over public need and manifesting into systems that push neoliberalist practices into play, which then would enter the world of the entrepreneur, the second horizon, where we see the sharing of an aspirational soul of the dreamer, but the rooted perspective of the realist, whose role here is critical in taking us to where we aspire to be. A proactive individual who goes the extra mile to get things done. Here, we start to see the change in more visible, tangible, and measurable ways, starting with policy, public space use, and stronger dialogues between the government and the people. The CLAs, again, in between, help us define the shift between the mental models that were required. And as we cross this bridge, we see that there is more of a collectivist worldview as opposed to the first bridge where public space is equitable. The transition also sees the tensions between capitalistic endeavors and signaling that even as we move into the future, tension amongst various players in the system will be a major hurdle to cross over. And now having a fair understanding of who, what, and why, Kendra will take us through how.
Yeah, thank you. So at this point in the game, we were, Peter can attest, fairly idealist in some of our ideas. And so we had a real need to ground some of our ideas in reality. And the Three Horizons model really helped with that. And certainly as we move into the intervention strategy and transition by design, that really helped us out. So now that we did kind of a deep dive into the Three Horizons and into what the challenges of the current system are and where we intend to take the system, we needed to have some intervention strategies to take us from where we are to where we want to be. So of course, in an ideal world, once again, we'd implement all of it and everything would go totally smoothly. But we've picked a few out that we believe are the ones that are the most important levers for change. So we mapped them out here on a sort of teeter-totter borrowed from a park setting, and using the 12 leverage points from Danilo Meadows, you'll notice that we also have a little bit of a suggested timeline moving from left to right into the future. So the first step to citizen dialogue influencing the social future of public space is to increase the capacity for information. And then once we consider the capacity for information, we can then turn to capacity of the space itself with considerations for infrastructure and availability of public space, and also decrease the capacity for vehicles at the same time. And often, some of us have probably seen this before, we see that public space decisions can take so long that by the time certain large initiatives are implemented, the technology behind them is already obsolete. So we have a real need to reduce the red tape in some of these processes. And we do believe that by enabling citizen dialogue to become common practice in some of these public space changes, we can begin to shorten some of these timelines. And how can we increase stability and overcome some of these resistances to change by focusing on systemic level fixes, integrating foresight and facilitating citizen dialogue. And then moving along to the other side here with information flows, they're just critical to citizen dialogue. There's often too much data and not enough digestible information that can be understood by the public. And so we have a few ideas on how to change that with improved platforms for dialogue that invite stakeholders into the process and seek to really improve the transparency between the city and its citizens. And of course, rules and regulations also play a large role in any public organization. And so we have a few ideas in this area as well. We propose that regulating uncontrolled transit-oriented development, incentivizing cultural uses and activities in public spaces, and encouraging citizen participation in all of these different areas are just some of the ways to affect some system change through rules and regulations. And finally, the goals of the system that need to be changed. We brainstormed around this, and we feel that the perception of public health is inherently tied to access to quality public space that's available to citizens. And we see that when there's better access to public space, that is quality space, we see better public health outcomes. Also, goals that reflect a balance between financial gains and the greater good for the public is important. And finally, I'm preaching to the choir with this one, but systemic problem solving should be the end goal, not just a component of decision making with regards to public spaces. So now that we've mapped out some of the strategic areas that we can intervene in, we established a more high-level roadmap, which you can see in the design elements of our synthesis map, but certainly follows through in the transition by design here. We need to sort of map out what needs to be done to make the change happen. So we use the transition by design tool to guide us through the stages that need to be implemented so that citizen voice and decision-making can become a lived reality of the future. So this was kind of an exciting tool for us to explore and experiment with, as it helps us to really see the big picture and be creative with our long-term outlook for the power of what we're proposing with citizen dialogue. So we initially started exploring some broad themes and drew inspiration from practices locally and across Canada and even across the globe in certain places. We then probed a little bit deeper into the 3 stages and worked on crafting some more specific, innovative initiatives that can be the drivers of change in each of these stages. So the 3 stages, starting from the left, are engaging with the public. And this is where we roll out some more communications and awareness plans and incentivize citizen participation a little bit. And then we build into the strong public dialogue. And here's where we introduce some more of the design thinking tools that really expand on citizen dialogue and start to bridge the gap between political action and citizen dialogue. And moving to the third wheel, Rimaz, too, we're inviting citizens. This is kind of the large term goal, inviting citizens to become active decision makers and contributors themselves to the process of public space design. And the whole aim here is to make collective community action the key to solving complex problems that we face today. So our proposal that sort of hinges all of this together is a dialogue toolkit that will facilitate conversations, decisions, and actions by the people. The toolkit aims to promote participation and engagement and include the public in an active decision-making process. So cities are comprised of the spaces that are the connective tissue that facilitate movement and community for the people. Public spaces, as we know, have a direct impact on the people they are built to serve. So our question is, why not include the citizens in the design and decision-making process to make their impact more meaningful? So I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity to present tonight alongside some really, really outstanding presentations and synthesis maps. Our team, as Manal said at the beginning, we come from really diverse backgrounds, and it was so awesome to be able to come together with our different strengths in this project and learn throughout the course. So we'd love to hear your questions and any comments you have now on the map.
Thanks, Kendra. It's really great to see these again. And this was, they go by so quickly when when we see them in, you know, in the final studio presentations and all that. And it really helps to see them in depth like this, and to recall all the great ideas that went into it and what the purposes were. So I guess my real question on this would also be similar to, well, with Sylvia's in the first one, which is, I mean, there are a lot of stakeholders that really could be involved with the, you know, engaging in conversations that could come out of the questions in this map. Have you shown it to anybody else yet? Have you thought about who you might, you know, how you might roll this out or get something started? I mean, it seems like this could be a completely different way to envision this, the engagement around streets following the kind of vacuum of the demise of the sidewalk labs, which is right before the 2 years of, you know, as he called it, the ghost town from the COVID lockdowns. And now, you know, who do you think needs to see this, and how?
Does anyone have an idea? I have an idea. I would, well, we have not shared this yet. You are our first share, first of all. But I would think that it'd be a great opportunity to start testing these out with some smaller citizen action groups or smaller city projects. Even this project was primarily researched within Toronto secondary research, but within the Toronto space. But I'd love to see it put forward to some smaller municipalities as well that have good stakeholder dialogue already, and how they might be able to use some of these tools, and maybe we could learn from them in that situation as well, and then bring it more into bigger projects.
Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, we are, I'm you know, one of the co-leads of the research team doing transformation research with City of Kitchener, or research on their, you know, change of planning and working with leadership, and we're studying their, you know, the processes over this period of transformation. I'm just thinking that would be a good one, and you know, so there might be some other others that come to mind. So I think that's a real good idea to, you know, I mean, within Toronto, you've got, you know, neighborhoods and groups and potentially, you know, citizens groups, but yeah, the cities of different sizes that are actively engaging in new modes of public deliberation and looking to get into this in depth, I think, and Kitchener would be one of them. Yeah, any, what other questions do you have, or do you have, as my kickoff?
Okay, I can't raise my hand for some reason, so I'm just gonna blurt it out. Fantastic, beautifully drawn, executed, like all of the sort of components of breaking down a complex system were visually compelling. Even the iteration, I mean, they're beautifully drawn. There's just so much effort and skill has gone into the artifact itself. It's really fantastic. Unfortunately, professionally, I can't contribute at all, except as a citizen. I can say I definitely want a say in how the streets are designed and how use is considered. I have to make it personal because I, again, can't contribute on a higher level, but for me, when I walk my neighborhood, trees are very important. I'm in a sort of heritage section of my town, and the trees are dying because of work that they do below the street level. And citizens are trying to voice how this is affecting their interaction with the community. And it's almost like we're being mocked because we're trying to protect the tree roots. I mean, really, that's it almost, they make it seem like we're you know, some random crazy, but there's so many of us. We're saying, you know, you're cutting the roots when you're, you know, working on the pipes, and these, you know, 100, 150-year-old trees are dying because we can't, and then by the time we have accessibility to contribute, it's too late. The damage is already being done. And so, you know, it's not maybe what's happening in the street, but it is a form of participation on a municipal level. I really feel like this presentation needs to be seen by the city councils so that they can have more empathy in understanding these sort of fringe groups that we're not really fringe. We are, you know, we do have valid arguments, but I think this is such a great tool for giving them empathy, for hearing our stories. That's how I see this as, and I think it's applicable to every council, any topic at all as it pertains to the community, not just literally the streets. So really strong message. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I should mention too, I think for the most part, Tanya and Rimaz and also Ashwini are the masterminds of the visual design. They were amazing.
I think for us, it was such an ideal future to craft. So we kind of went all in crafting that. But having said that, I think it's quite a collaborative effort of the three of us. And the narrative, I think, written by the other three women you see. So yes.
So suggestion for me, at least to Peter, would be like, at least like I personally enjoyed the semester and the subject so much that I would have like would want it with IRM. Doing those two together would, like, I think if you can nudge this program that direction for the full-time cohort as well, like that would be amazing.
Oh, that's so good to hear. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Yeah. So who else? So like Joanne, Sebastian, any of the visitors. You know, what other? Any other questions, or should we?
I don't have a question, and I don't want to, interfere if someone has a question. I like Joanne. I loved it, and you can do great research work, but you have to make people listen. And your narrative and your visuals were absolutely beautiful. You unfolded it in a pace that told an incredible story. I really could feel the reaction on my own self, like thinking, wow, I didn't think about that, right? Or this is really important. And I just think you did a great job, just a really, really great job. I'm in the chat on another group saying, you got to get on this. You're going to get on this, see this one. It's really, really fantastic. Just a great, and noticing all the little details that you put in your graphics that navigated our eyes to move to places. I thought it was just a great topic, an important topic, and so well delivered. Yeah.
Oh, and thanks for hanging in there a little bit later. And these presentations really do require the space to, hear all the main points, to see the, to finally kind of view the whole map without being in a rush, and to hear some feedback. And I'd also recommend that all the teams submit these maps to the RSD 11 symposium, which the exhibition will be opening really soon. So I think, we'll want to see them there too. You won't get a chance to present them in this way, but they'll be seen and published in the symposium as part of the exhibition. So.
One thing I'd also like to say is that the three presentations today are in some form they have certain relationships between each other, like in terms of misinformation, information distribution, and the whole idea of NIMBYism in city streets, and then again the dissemination of information in the whole NFT and art community. And I think for systems thinking, at least, it's very important to view these as nested crises, like nesting these three, because there are certainly layers of each on top of another. Like, I enjoy that very much. Thank you.
And Rimaz, and how much the citizen's voice is muzzled inadvertently or overtly, yes. and how the desire for change it sits there right there, opportunity to, yeah, really, really fantastic. Yeah.
Well, we have to learn to lead the conversations with those that are overwhelmed by the innate complexity and the relationships between these systems. Everybody in professional and leadership roles tends to have a specialization, and so that leads to the silos, right? And it just makes it very difficult for people to discuss the complexity of and relationships between, you know, the overlaps of the systems that we all participate in. And so these visualizations really can help and maybe ought to connect at some point. I mean, I could imagine a very large board that you could zoom through that could connect the different maps and show their connections, you know, at the level of, you know, the entities that you're even showing in the models. And by showing links between them would be a whole nother course or a big summer project, but that would be pretty fantastic to see how these went, and the variety between the different mapping styles would then be this kind of, you know, exploring like different journeys to different cities in a way that each one would take on its own character and yet be connected into the narratives that we're learning from the others. But so thanks for bringing that idea up, and I'll have to, you know, if a way to do that came up, I mean, I'd find a way to fund it, and if it could be done through an existing technology and kind of a collaboration or something, but that would be a powerful way to go if we had the right platform for that. But these videos, I think, will also help to share the ideas. I mean, capturing it in video, which we didn't used to do when we shared the maps live, or even using, before 2020, we're using the Visual Analytics Lab, which was pretty brilliant because each of your maps would be, you know, shown in a room size, you know, touch screen projection that you could zoom in and out of the map, you know, on the presentation on a 25-foot by 15-foot high, or maybe it's even longer, like 25-foot long and floor to ceiling touch screen. But you can only get about, you know, people have to be there live, and you can't really video record that. So these all have their advantages, and this one is, well, it's all being recorded, and now this part is also being captured. Are there any final thoughts before we sign off then for the evening?
I was just going to say too that what I loved was all these tools that you have in design journeys. It just inspires everyone, because you don't know what you don't know, and you work through it, and you have all these aha moments as you're in it, like you're immersed in this experiential process. But what I really loved about the last group is you're new experimenting with the tools, and they even took it into creativity. They did 3 CLAs with the 3 horizons, and I was like, oh, sometimes our new tool and we'll just stick with it, let's execute. But you guys just got brave and bold and said, now there's 3 of these things, and it's going to move in a sequence. And I really like that, because it just adds another layer of saying, go try it, just try it. So if you're a student of it watching, I think, the video, you'll see how the CLA came into different images and how everyone did it in a different way, right? I really was so inspired by that. And then the last tool that you used from Jeremy's book, I'm like screenshotting, going, oh, I'm going to use that. Where was that? I didn't.
Oh, the transition by design.
Yeah, it was so amazing. I'm like, oh, how did we miss that? So anyway, it was really good. So that's my final comment. And thank you, Peter, for allowing us to share our work.
Thank you for presenting tonight, and everyone for attending, and for those who stayed late. So thanks again. And next month, I think, just, you know, stay tuned. There's usually something else in August, probably one person in a conversation or something, and then we kind of, you know, back to school, and we'll have another season. And so there's a lot going on this year. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the sharing this evening and look to see you soon.
Thanks. Good night. Thank you.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
all. Oh, stop.